Want to make sure to catch that. Okay. So my name is Holly McCrae, and I am the Events and Outreach Manager for McKenzie River Trust. And it is such a pleasure to join you this evening. I have just a few housekeeping items to share with you. When you entered the webinar, the system automatically put you on mute and turned off your webcam. So you are in a view only, listen only mode. After the presentation, we'll have some time for questions and answers. So to submit a question, just use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And you can submit those at any time during the presentation. We may not have time to get to them all, but we will certainly do our best. If you have to leave the presentation for any reason or have technical difficulties, I'll be sending an email out tomorrow or Friday that will include a link to the recording of the presentation. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge and honor the Indigenous people who stewarded the lands we are on today for many generations before us. Colonization by white settlers drove most Indigenous people away from their homelands, often by force. And it is important to acknowledge our past so that we may work towards a more just and equitable future. Our projects and service area include the traditional homelands of the Kalapuya, Siletz, Coos, Lower Umpqua, Sayusla, Lala, and other bands and tribes. Today, many of their descendants are part of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians, Confederated Tribes of the Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Sayusla Indians, the Cow Creek Band of the Umpqua Tribe of Indians, and Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs. We understand that having a role in land ownership means we have a responsibility to those whose lands were stolen. And the land calls us to commit to continue learning how to be better stewards of the land, as well as better allies to all of the people that inhabit it. So this is our last scheduled HabiChat. Since last fall, we have invited local experts to present on everything from lampreys and ethnobotany to beavers and mushrooms. But for tonight, we're excited to bring it all home with a presentation about a project that our conservation team has been working tirelessly on for months, and we're really excited about. So I would now like to turn it over to McKenzie River Trust's own Elizabeth Goward, who will be presenting on the project, followed by a Q&A with our full conservation team. So Elizabeth, if you want to take it from here.
Great. Thank you so much, Holly, for that introduction. And thank you all for joining us this evening. As Holly shared, this is our final HabiChat for the time being. And I am really, really excited and honored to be able to share with you all this upcoming project that's really the culmination of many years of work by our staff and partners. So today we're going to be talking about in-stream restoration and specifically a project coming up at Finrock Reach, a property owned and managed by McKenzie River Trust partners and volunteers. So McKenzie River Trust, for those of you who aren't familiar, our work is to really help people protect and care for lands and rivers that they cherish in Western Oregon. And this work really relies on three main tenets, which is protect, connect, and restore. We do this through purchasing land or conservation easements in special places. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we define special place. These legal tools help to protect land in perpetuity. And so really our work is forever work, which leads us to this really important work of connecting people like you to this organization and these lands that make our area such an amazing place to live, work, and play. So we work with landowners, volunteers, and members to care for and really strengthen the stewardship of lands and rivers in our service area. And then lastly, we really work to also find ways and opportunities where we can restore landscapes, where we can restore function to natural systems to help be able to maybe erase or change some of the scars that colonialism has left on the landscape, and to find areas where this work can be incredibly impactful, not just for fish and wildlife, but for the communities where these areas are. So when we think about what a special place is or our priorities, we often come to what connects all of us, which is clean water. We also think about healthy and dynamic river systems that support fisheries and abundant habitat and recreation. We look for areas where there's special plants and species and wildlife, scenic open space, and those view sheds that make our area such an amazing place to go, even commuting to work, to be able to look up in the hillsides and see nature around us. We also work to protect working lands, the farms and forest land that make our region economically viable and that provide important jobs and resources to our communities. And then also recreational opportunities. Specific at Finn Rock, the boat landing serves as a critical component of the McKenzie River kind of community and tourism opportunities. And this work happens in a very broad range, all the way from the Upper Cascades to the coast, north into Lincoln County, and south down into Roseburg and Douglas County. And to learn more about all of this, if you're new to the Trust, we encourage you to connect with us and learn more. But today we're really here around this point that is our connection to the natural world. So late author, friend of McKenzie River Trust and McKenzie River resident Barry Lopez writes, "To put your hands in a river is to feel the cords that bind the earth together." And this is what this work is really based on: our connection to water, our connection to one another, and our connection to landscape. So in order to really be able to kind of understand how we're making these decisions around restoration or what it can even look like, we need to move back in time and start to look at how people shaped the rivers that we know today. I myself grew up on the Willamette River outside of Salem, and my view of rivers were pretty straight, narrow, deep, fast-moving bodies of water. But when we look at some of the graphics in front of us, we can see that even in 1850, our river wasn't very straight. It had a lot of space to move and meander across the floodplain. It wasn't confined by revetments or built up areas along its edges to keep it straight and narrow. As people moved out west, the railroad was a little bit behind them. Rivers not only connected people to place as a source of clean water and food, but also connected people to people as a way of traveling across this landscape of the West. And this led to some actions that have forever shaped the rivers that we know today. You can see in the bottom slides, one of my favorites, these are people ice skating on the Willamette River in downtown Salem. Because at that time, in around 1910, there were many side channels and the river could actually freeze. As we watch history progress, the ability to move goods from the upper watersheds down to mills along the river's edge and out the Columbia to ship across not only the nation, but the world, we had to really create our rivers as highways and corridors, areas where barges and large logs could be floated and moved. Both of these pictures are areas where I grew up. And so this was not just unique to the main stem Willamette. We have photos here from the McKenzie River itself of people going and doing that work of building the West up. And so you can see, I love this picture on the bottom hand here of a practice of dynamiting out logs to get them moving, or actually to also clear the area. So the rivers were really that connecting force and were really used for a commerce purpose, which really changed how we see things. If you want to learn more about logging on the McKenzie River and that history, we actually have a pretty great YouTube video that Holly's going to share in the chat with you that has more of these photos that were provided to us by the Lane County Historical Society. So with all of this loss and hurt and change, how do we really approach healing our river systems? First, we need to look at what are the qualities of a healthy river. One of the first qualities that we look at is stream cover. So are there trees along its edges? Because these trees end up as large wood in the stream. As the trees are there, gravels that move with higher flows are able to be captured. Water carves out deep pools And these areas begin to be able to collect organic matter, which acts as food for aquatic invertebrates. Once we have a strong abundance of invertebrates, we have food for fish who come back up and actually feed the rivers and feed the forests along its side in the case of the salmon. So all of these are essential ingredients to what a healthy river system might look like. So when we're approaching our river restoration, we're looking at a couple of key tenets. The first is really increasing connectivity. So when we think back to those slides of this nice meandering landscape being channelized into more single straight channel, we lose this connectivity to these backwaters and side areas. So one approach we use is grading. So how do we help to reverse or stem off the down cutting and erosion on the sides of the river's bank? By doing this, and we can increase fisheries productivity. So in the bottom hand, you can see a restoration project at Green Island, which reconnected an isolated pond back into the side channel of the Willamette River. This provides this critical habitat or off-channel winter refugia for young fish as they're trying to grow. If you imagine being a small fish in a high winter flow versus a side channel or pool, you can imagine which one you're going to be more successful in. These areas and this connectivity across the floodplain provide slower velocities to nourish fish, and they help to spread water across the landscape more broadly, allowing the landscape to act as a sponge, which can help to actually clean water. We also look at the complexity of these side channels and habitats, and specifically those large wood deposits that would have been natural pre-logging and pre-clearing of the river. Having large wood in the stream increases what we call a pool to riffle ratio. So these are areas where fish might have escape out of a main stream or a high flow environment. They also can increase pool depths as water collides atop logs and then cuts back underneath. This provides essential cover for fish, as well as has areas where organic matter can really accumulate. The roughness elements of the stumps, especially the importance of root wads when we're looking at adding large wood, helps to dissipate a stream flow and that energy of water as it meets more surface area and slows down. This also creates what we call aggradation and depositional environments. So the movement of gravels, which we talked about in the life cycle, where they can collect in areas, move around, and we get varied sediment sizes, which are incredibly important when we're thinking about fish in particular, and the making or nest making that they do. And these areas retain more organic matter, which leads to aquatic invertebrate abundance in the system. When we're looking at not only land protection, but also restoration, we're also thinking about cold water. So there are a lot of areas. The McKenzie River provides incredible, cool, clean water that goes under the earth. There's the word here, hyporeic flow, which means to come up from below. This is the exchange of groundwater where it meets the surface. So all of this work to kind of spread water across the landscape to regrade systems. Actually, when we raise the water table below as well, and can actually create more cold water environments. And salmon are 10 times more abundant in cold water alcoves than in warm. These photos that you're looking at here are taken in the same spot on a property protected by the trust called McKenzie Oxbow on the lower McKenzie. You can see the main stem channel on the top rushing along. And as we turn to look the other way, there's this incredible cold water area where the water is slow and calm. This is an area where there's a lot of nutrients, there's sediments, and we find many young fish. And all of this contributes to that complexity that was really lost with some of the actions taken to turn rivers into transportation corridors. And all of this really leads to fish rearing habitat. Diverse flows are incredibly important, just like humans at different stages of a fish's lives, they need a different environment in which to thrive. The slower velocities allow for younger fish to grow stronger, not be flushed downstream, to forage more freely. Increased cover in areas protects from predators, and increased nutrient capture again leads to increased productivity of plants as well as invertebrates in the system. And we also really want to caveat all of this with the planting of vegetation along the banks. And we use the word riparian, which means the space between a river and more of the upland slopes. So thinking about how much has been done, how do we really reimagine wild, or how do we really go about this work? In the context of our work closer to town, we have specific constraints, and our projects often aim to serve a particular function where we create these channel habitats, like I showed, of reconnecting the ponds to the Willamette River. And that really serves a function, but it really doesn't aid in this process that's been lost. So we're going to be talking about today as an area where we have more of an opportunity to go a little bit bigger and mimic the process of a river more than we might in areas where we have close by homes and neighbors and agricultural lands, which we want to protect. So living rivers need space to move. And all of this work is really about learning from the life cycle of a true living river. In this very complicated model, which you will not be tested on, we get to see a life cycle. I think we all in school learned the life cycle of a plant, but rivers have them too. And through some human impacts on our systems, especially in the West, our rivers have gotten stuck because this life cycle relies on floods, and pretty big floods that naturally would have happened across the landscape in 100 to 500 year timelines. So when we think about our current rivers, this high velocity flow has really taken kind of a historic floodplain wide meander of the river and channelized it. If you imagine turning on your garden hose while it's laying in the soil, you know that immediately it's going to dig out a bunch of soil and leave a mark where the water had just been. This process has been going on for many years in our local river systems. And when we take a life stage approach or a process-based approach, we're actually thinking about how do we mimic the loss of major floods on the landscape? How do we mimic these pulses of water? And so in the type of restoration we'll be doing at Finrock Reach, we're going to be looking at actually filling in some of that stream bed by pulling the banks back down. Once we pull the banks back down, we want to secure the area. So as we talked about, adding large wood, which can help to move and shape, collect gravels, allow things to meander, those also will anchor this work in as we move on the ground. And we'll talk a lot more about what this looks like visually and in practice. But for this one, this is an aerial of what this might look like. On the left, we see the mainstream McKenzie River, and on the right, we see an aerial of the South Fork Restoration Project that was implemented by the McKenzie Watershed Council and the U.S. Forest Service. We also want to thank the McKenzie Watershed Council for providing many representative photos from the amazing work that you've been doing upstream that we'll be sharing this evening. So multiple projects that are process-based have already occurred in the Willamette Valley. These have been implemented by our partners at the Middle Fork Willamette Watershed Council, as well as the McKenzie Watershed Council. And some of the outcomes that have been observed, even though this is rather new, and these were more recent projects, is an incredible biotic response. So this means more fish, higher red counts for salmon, rapid regrowth of vegetation, and just a quicker comeback than one might expect after the implementation. It was also observed to provide some high water flood relief as the large wood added in stream dissipated flows, specifically in 2019 when we had high water in the area. And this increased connectivity, this water across the floodplain and allowing water to move through soil, of course, contributes and supports water quality for our region. But this work is messy. If you look at the picture here, you can see it looks like a construction zone in the middle of the forest. And this is why we really want to share this kind of amazing work with folks, because we do understand that it's pretty incredible to see, and it looks pretty destructive. So we're going to look through a couple of photos before diving into Finrock specifically. This is a photo of the same area after it's been rewatered. And you can see here, there's trees, tree islands in the river. We have large wood on the ground and native vegetation planted coming back to life. This is a photo of rewatering. So we'll talk a little bit about what that means. But you can see aerially here, we no longer have a single stem of a river, but water that's moving across a broad range with many characteristics, including stream, pool, wetland, and others. Specifically with the South Fork McKenzie project, there is an incredible response, which many of you may have seen in the local news, at just the salmon returns, and not just returns, but nesting that took place in the area, or red making. And this is one of the most important parts of when we're talking about why we're doing this type of restoration, because it is so dramatic and often feels drastic in our region. But as salmon are being hatched out in our systems, if they don't have these slow velocity areas, many of them get washed downstream. So what we're really focusing on is how do we support every life stage of spring Chinook salmon? And how do we create space for them to thrive in this area? So what does this look like in the context of Finrock? First of all, once again, want to really thank and honor the partners who are also a part of the implementation. And today we'll share our restoration project team will all be here to help answer questions for you. But thank you to the McKenzie Watershed Council for your guidance and support in the planning, U.S. Forest Service, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the Eugene Water and Electric Board, all of who will be helping to make this project possible and who have been working with us since 2017. We also want to thank the technical team of advisors who have been working on this, as well as the engineers who have provided some pretty amazing modeling for us to see how this will look in action. So in context, you can see the South Fork McKenzie River project is upstream here. When we look at this photo, this is a LiDAR photo, and the kind of crinkly areas are your upland slopes that come down. And we see there's this area that's pretty flat and remarkably wide. This is our historic floodplain. These are the scars that show us where the river once was that are able to be accessed through current LiDAR imaging. And just downstream of the South Fork project is Finrock. So this project connects in directly to a middle-McKenzie vision of restoration to reconnect and restore our floodplain. Finrock Reach is 277 acres. It was purchased in 2015-16 in auction and supported by many, many members and community donors through the Home Waters campaign. The area provides recreation through the Finrock boat landing, which was protected through the purchase. It provides amazing habitat for multiple threatened and endangered species, including spring Chinook salmon, Pacific lamprey, western pond turtles, and more. It also provides community connections through not only offering opportunities to get on the river or to fish within it. The Friends of Finrock Reach, who began in 2017, have been critical stewards of this area and who have done an amazing job supporting us after the Holiday Farm fire came through with replanting efforts. And this area was really protected to find ways to actualize this concept of a living river. So this restoration is side channel based. So it doesn't come up to the top of our river's life cycle because it's not valley wide. It's going to be highly visible from Highway 126. We'll show you some aerials where you can see the adjacency to the highway to where the restoration work will be happening. And this connects to that larger network of conservation projects, including the Deer Creek project and the South Fork Phase 1 and 2 project, both implemented by the McKinsey Watershed Council. And this project will improve habitat for multiple threatened and endangered species on site. So when we look at the history of the river in this area, we see in 1945, the river is actually on a different side of the property whole. In 1959, the river takes on a more meandering course. Swooping across the floodplain, you can see gravel bars, and we can also see the impacts of logging coming all the way down to the riparian edges. By 1972, the areas to the far north are starting to be mined for gravel uses to help build logging roads. And you can see the river has picked a new path, though we still have some meander. But in 2016, we're left with what's a pretty straight and narrow channel cut into the landscape, along with some isolated gravel ponds on the property. So the primary goal of our work is to really take that area with gravel ponds and where the river once was, which is now home to the Elk Creek side channel, which I'll probably just call the side channel going forward, and to really increase water in the floodplain. So we'll be trading terrestrial habitat for aquatic habitat, creating wetlands and creating space for water to move, especially in high flow events. So we have some representative images from our modeling here that shows the difference between the current conditions on your left and what we aim to have it look like once we are completed with work on the right. This work will be taking place this summer during a salmon safe window from June to August. Most of the activity will take place on the lower part of the project. So this yellow line here outlines the entire project area. The white dotted line is the outline of the property. And then you can see just outside that white line is Highway 126. So this lower area, it'll be very visible for the work that we're doing. We're primarily working with local contractors and community partners, and really excited to bring this vision to life. This will dramatically increase wetland habitat on the property. So here's another image just showing existing wetlands and water. This is a little different than the one before that was more stream-based, and shows how much of an increase we have here on that lower section. And this project has a lot of components to it. So we have all of these up on our website if you'd like to dig into maps more. But some of the main components are, we'll be building what's called a temporary diversion channel. And this is going to allow us to redirect Elk Creek's flow through the Finrock property into the McKenzie so that we can go about the work that needs to be done. The work includes cutting back the banks. So when we think back to that kind of 3 graphic image of pulling banks in and filling the river, spreading it out, that'll be the primary part of the project. We'll be placing large wood across the site to anchor, as well as leaving islands of trees, not only for habitat, but to maintain some of the riparian quality. In the far north of the project, you can see there's the ponds. We'll be building and improving turtle habitat specifically for the western pond turtles who live on site. And all of this really aims from a habitat and a function focus. So increasing turtle nesting habitat. This design specifically preserves some mixed habitats. Western pond turtles are up for potential listing as threatened and endangered, and we have them on site. However, this area hasn't shown really strong evidence of young turtles being able to be very successful. And this project's design will hopefully help to create more habitat for them to be safe and thrive in. We'll be trading what's terrestrial and aquatic habitat, so land for water, adding complexity. And this is going to increase habitat for dozens of species on site, and then removing invasive species and increasing native plant diversity within the project area. All of this also benefits some key fish species, including bull trout and spring Chinook salmon, both of whose kind of main habitats are shown here in the McKenzie River Basin map. We do have spring Chinook salmon who have been spawning on site in this area for many years. I'm sure several people on this call have had the privilege to go out and see that. And we have this opportunity that's pretty incredible to provide them a really amazing, successful fishery for their young to grow in through this project. And this also benefits other species, including Pacific lamprey and our project partners, the beaver, Castor canadensis, who are on site. We have done initial monitoring for many species and look forward to continuing to work with partners as well as community volunteers to watch the impacts of this work over time on some of these charismatic friends of ours on the landscape. So this timeline is coming right up. In late June, we'll be building some temporary access infrastructure, so ways in which for us to move across the area. We'll be creating that temporary channel that will divert the water across the landscape, opening up the project area for the earthwork that needs to happen. Then we'll be working on fish salvage. So as we're moving the water, we'll be getting in and collecting aquatic animals and moving them outside of the project area. The largest part of this work takes place from mid-July to mid-August, which is that cutting and filling and placing of large wood in the channel. So really taking that footprint that we have and reshaping it to have some of those more healthy and dynamic characteristics that we've talked about today. And by mid-August, late August, we will rewater the area. So we will shut down the diversion channel that we've created and move the water back into the landscape before spring Chinook salmon return to spawn. And so you can support this work in many, many ways. One of the biggest ones is helping us to spread the word. As you've seen from the photos, this can look pretty drastic or like a construction zone. Where water was, people will see water moved away and it's just being temporarily diverted. And we really encourage you to reach out to us with more questions. So I'd love to invite my wonderful coworkers to join us for the question and answer period of this. So Brent Ross is our land steward and part of the project team for the Finrock restoration. Daniel Dietz is our conservation director, and Krister Lebrecht is our restoration projects manager. And we would love to hear questions and engage with you all around this project. So let's see. Oh, great. This is a good question. I'll let any of you take it. So Kevin Shanley is asking, what's the projected lifespan of heavy wood? And will it need to be renewed or refreshed periodically? What are your thoughts? Aim it at Daniel.
Sorry, I think we were chatting in tight chat. I think Christian might have a little bit better information than I do. I don't know exactly what the lifespan is of large woody debris. One of the benefits of these kind of projects is by putting the sheer amount of large woody debris that we have in there and lowering the velocities, we should be also catching more logs as they are coming down river. So the site in some ways will help perpetuate itself. We do know, though, that over time we may need to augment large woody debris, but I don't know the exact time frame from which that would need to occur. Krister, do you have any more information than that?
Yeah, I guess I would just add that the Forest Service does have a plan to augment gravel and large wood upriver of this project. So, we anticipate that there are going to be inputs of gravels and large wood over time at our project.
Great, thank you both. So there's a question here from Craig Patterson just around our partners that we're working with, and I think kind of getting at who's on our technical team and a little bit more information about the science or approach behind the work.
I'll go ahead and take that one as well. So we're really fortunate to have some really great partners here, and I cannot stress enough how indebted we are to the United States Forest Service and to the McKenzie Watershed Council, especially for helping us really think through the design and understand the ramifications of this work. But other project partners that we've been working with on the technical team include the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, some hydrologists with the University of Oregon, and trying to remember who else is on our tech team. Oh, we've also been consulting with the Nature Conservancy as well.
Sorry, I lost my unmute button for a second. Pat Fisher is wondering about the large wood input and will it come from some fire debris? Brett?
Yeah, so a lot of the wood's been coming from different sources. A large part of it from BLM parcels, and some of it from ODOT clearing along 126. So most of that wood was a result of the Holiday Farm fire and those impacted areas. So it's a really good opportunity to go ahead and use that wood.
Great, thank you. We also have a question around the impacts of the Holiday Farm fire on this project.
The Holiday Farm fire has not had a dramatic impact on this project as far as its design and how we're looking at implementing it. It is something that we definitely asked ourselves, when that tragedy did occur. And, for us, the design basically remains relatively unchanged, but I think the benefits are really one of the things that have changed. We're still going to have benefits for fish and wildlife and also for water quality. But with the Holiday Farm fire, we are expecting that the literature suggests that for really up to 5 years into the future, we will expect the water to run off the hillsides in the Holiday Farm fire area much more rapidly than it did previous to the fire. And so that'll create basically a more flashier system that the river itself will respond more quickly to high water events. And so by creating an area where we have much more floodplain that's connected to the river, basically that's more accessible to the river, some of those floodwaters will be able to have at least a little bit more area in which to spread before they start to go into human communities. We don't have that really well quantified, but that'll be one of the benefits that comes from this project that was always there, but is really a little bit more important after the Holiday Farm fire than there was before it.
Thank you, Daniel. So we have the question around, I think it's probably more in stream modeling, but did the partners evaluate the possibility of the river returning to its earlier geometry along the opposite riverbank through the soon to be restored area? So probably referring back to the 1973 aerial we were looking at and earlier. Krister?
Yeah, I can address that. So yeah, in prior to the dams going in 64, when the river really was over there along where Highway 126 is now, there's very low risk of avulsion, which is the process of a river sort of changing course based on a big flood, because we don't have those big floods anymore. And what we're actually doing with this project is really reducing the velocity of the water over the area that we're bringing in wood and spreading out the water. And so I think the risk of changing the course of the main stem river is really pretty much nil.
Right. I think that's a great question, and whether or not we'd avulse the river was definitely one of the questions that we asked ourselves going into this project. But like Krista was saying, you know, one of these sort of stage 8, stage 0 designs are really designed to actually dissipate that stream energy, you know, that same stream energy which actually was causing the side channel to incise and cut down into its bed is now actually being spread across a much larger floodplain. And then you add in the large woody debris, which creates what they call surface roughness, but basically more resistance to water flow and creating even lower velocities. You know, I think in some ways we probably have reduced the chance of avulsion potentially over time. That said, a major flood event, you know, can rework that area in ways that are hard to predict. But that would be true whether we are doing this project or not doing this project.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. So if welcoming any other questions that folks might have, also want to invite folks to follow up with us directly. Feel free to email our team. As we shared, there's this project information is also available online on our website. And we're more than happy to talk with you about what is coming ahead for this work and address more technical questions or concerns that anyone might have as we move forward. So otherwise, I am going to pass it back to Holly.
Can I ask you one question? I was actually just a question. So I will go ahead and ask it here. There was a question about logs that leave the project area, what the potential danger is of those leaving the project area and entering into the main stem.
Would you like to take this, Krista, or shall I?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take that. So the one of the overall goals of the project is to reduce velocity and increase surface area of the wetted surface of the stream and the floodplain, and that's the goal of that is to help habitat for juvenile rearing and spawning habitat for salmon. And so what we've actually done is reduce the risk of some of the wood that we're putting in the river to migrate off site. And, like Daniel just mentioned, you get a 250 to 500 year flood and, kind of all bets are off. And yes, so that's my answer.
Yeah, and I guess I would like to take that a little bit further and just say that when you looked at the pictures of some of the slides that Elizabeth was showing, where it just looks like logs are lying willy-nilly all over the floodplain, really, there are some constructed log jams that are part of this project where we're actually embedding the wood into the gravel itself. In some cases, up to 60% of the tree will actually be underneath the gravel itself. And especially for the downstream log jams, those are going to be some of the largest on the project and have the most embedded wood within it. So in some ways, you almost consider this like a belt and suspenders risk mitigation here, where by reducing the amount of velocity there, we're going to reduce the possibility of logs moving, but by making sure that we actually have some of that wood deeply embedded, especially on the downstream end, if any wood was to become, was start to be moving across the site, that increases the chance that we would actually catch that wood before it actually left the site through those log jams that we're constructing.
Great. And there's a great question around creating any specific visitor access elements into this area. And we have not had that conversation, as we've been really focused on the restoration elements and design. But Daniel, have you had any thoughts about that?
There are not currently any visitor access elements associated with this project. They're very difficult to move through, so it's not something that we've really been designing into it. I mean, we've talked before about having some designated fishing areas, but it's not ones that we have currently designed into the project, nor do we have a good way to access it. And then I see in the chat, there's another one about recreational use of the river. So this side channel is not something that's currently used for boating. In fact, right now, the mouth of the side channel itself is blocked off by several large snags that are lying across the mouth of the side channel. So it's, and the impact on the main stem itself should really, there really won't be any impact to the main stem, because while we're reducing the velocity that's moving through the area, that's only because we're increasing the surface area in total. The volume of water that's moving through the side channel will remain basically the same. So the amount of water going into the side channel coming from the main stem will remain basically the same, and then the amount of water coming back into the main stem below the side channel will also be about the same. So the recreational ability for the main stem will remain the same, and the side channel has never been one that's really been used by drift boats or other boaters.
Great, thank you, Daniel. Here's a really fun question around how will MRT improve turtle habitat, and what does that look like? Krista, do you want to answer it, or do you want me to?
I think you should answer that, Elizabeth.
Right. I'm a resident turtle and beaver enthusiast, and we're both hats. So this is a really fantastic question, especially looking at Western pond turtles and the Western painted turtles that are on site. So in this project area, we began kind of studying nesting in 2017 using some really great interns with partnership with ODFW. And what we've found is that there are very few young turtles, and young turtles need something a little bit more specific than grown turtles. They're young generally for the first 4 years, don't move more than like 400 yards from their nest. They really live right along the shore, and so they need dense vegetative cover. Turtles also need some specific gravels. We have a lot of predation up at Finn Rock because the only areas that our turtles have access to are pretty bare and open. And so the turtle islands that we'll be making are within wetland complexes, which reduces risk from predators like raccoons and possums and foxes that will want to dig up and eat the baby turtles. And then once again, that wetland habitat is pretty, provides some of that slower water with increased cover for them as they're growing. And somebody is asking the same question about turtles, but for beaver. Thank you, Jim. So I'll just keep going. So we do have beaver on site here in the Upper Willamette watershed. Our beavers tend to be what's called bank dwelling. So it's not as common that you'll see a lodge that you might think of if you're in more of the Rockies habitat. And so our beavers live in the banks along the rivers, and they also need a lot of forage, and they're pretty territorial. So beavers get along okay, but they all kind of have a zone that they work in. So by increasing the amount of wetted area, we're also increasing how much access to habitat and the carrying capacity of the area. And so we did preliminary beaver monitoring with our awesome Beaver Believer volunteers. In 2000, it was pre-COVID, so 2018 and 19 probably. And so we'll see how that impacts them. But what we're really hoping is we kind of make the joke that if we could train beavers to drive the skid steers, we wouldn't have to do anything, because beavers really do this work. And when we're thinking about this kind of large scale restoration and all of those elements that are healthy in a watershed, that's really what beavers provide as kind of ecosystem engineers in the area. So we expect that beavers will move into the site and help to maintain these qualities by providing more areas for that bank dwelling, as well as more aquatic habitat where they can stay safe from predation and predators, and just thrive a little bit more. So great.
Just wanted to add a little bit to what Elizabeth mentioned about the turtle habitat. I mean, currently, the current conditions on site are not beneficial to turtle habitat. So in the pond area, there's a lot of steep banks. There's just not a lot of wood, which they need. So what will be left are the leaf islands will be sloped in a way that offers better habitat, especially nesting habitat. So there's gonna be a lot more opportunity, a lot more prime habitat than what currently exists.
Great. Well, I am not seeing, oh, one more came through. How will beavers be affected by the work we're doing in the next 3 months? That's a very good question, and I'm not sure how to best answer it. It's really likely, because the process will be slow, that they'll kind of move upstream and kind of follow the water. But that's something that I think we'll have to watch for. And we haven't seen if we have resident beavers in the areas. They tend to leave their lodges and then kind of come back to areas over time. Sorry, we don't have a better answer. Well, you are always very welcome to reach out to any of our team members individually, or request more information or learn more about the project. I'm going to pass it back to Holly, but just want to once again thank all of you for coming and engaging in this work. As I said, this has been an incredible culmination of a lot of work, especially Krister Lebrecht here, who has been kind of spearheading it along with Daniel and partners, and to all of our staff members and folks in the community who've helped to make this project possible. So thank you all so much for being here. We hope you get out and enjoy the last bit of sunshine outside of our windows.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and all my fellow co-workers. I would just want to thank you all for joining us this evening. Elizabeth's right. There's 101 things you all could be doing on this beautiful spring evening. And I appreciate you choosing to spend it with us, taking the time to learn about what we do as an organization and how we do it. It has been really fun to connect with you all virtually, but I speak for the entire McKenzie River Trust staff when I say that we look forward to more opportunities to see your faces in person, meeting on the ground, and in beautiful places. So thank you all again. I hope you have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you hopefully next time in person. Good night.